Fracking is an easy, low-cost way to get natural gases from shale beds by forcing a solution of chemical and sand-filled water down into steel-lined wells. The process creates fractures within the shale, through which hydrocarbons are forced out and up into the well so that way they can go into storage. Despite it being inexpensive and efficient, there are a number of environmental and public health concerns. So fracking fluid is basically a mixture of water, sand, and chemicals. The fluid is forced down into steel wells at very high pressures to open fractures within the shale. The sand in the fluid is used to keep the fractures open so that way the hydrocarbons can get out. And the hydrocarbons are really what they're trying to get at. The hydrocarbons go up through the well and into on-site storage facilities. Of course, wastewater is produced using fracking. The wastewater is toxic, so it isn't safe for people to use or even to come in contact with in some cases. The wastewater that goes back up through the pipe is then injected into storage wells on site, and then afterwards it's sent to treatment plants and it's recycled. I'm actually going to go into causes and effects together because they definitely work together a little bit. Fracking produces toxic wastewater that is filled with dangerous chemicals. However, before the mixture becomes waste, obviously it is injected into the ground and creates fractures and things like that. When it is injected into the ground as it's going down, the well can actually rupture because of the pressure. And if the well ruptures, the fluid seeps out into the groundwater and can contaminate the groundwater. This makes water very dangerous to use in farming and agriculture, and it also makes it unsafe to drink and to bathe in and clean things in. And in some cases, specifically there was a town in Oklahoma near a fracking site where they, after the fracking had increased, there was an increased number of birth defects, illnesses, and an increased number actually of cancer cases. Because fracturing actually creates fractures within the ground, there have been increased reports of seismic activity in and around fracking sites. Earthquakes on their own are very dangerous because they can destroy buildings and roads and infrastructure and they can kill people. However, when they occur around fracking sites, this damage is intensified within a small area around the epicenter of the earthquake, because man-made earthquakes that occur near fracking sites are very, very, very shallow, and shallow earthquakes basically give a higher amount of damage to a lower amount of magnitude. An earthquake with a magnitude of 2, for example, may have the effects of an earthquake with a magnitude of 5, just because of how shallow the earthquake is. An increased amount of pollution in groundwater will have a largely negative impact on farming and agricultural practices near fracking sites. The economy will suffer due to a lack of farming because there will be less safe drinking water to use. Also, this could severely damage the meat production industry. Because there are less crops for us to eat, there will also be less crops for animals to eat, meaning that the animals that we mass produce, such as cows and pigs and things like that, they won't be able to eat, basically. People won't be able to eat, people lose jobs, and just it's bad all around. There are some solutions. For example, if people want to continue to frack, if people want to continue to produce hydraulic fractured natural gases, there are ways to do this. For example, companies can find ways to reduce production waste by altering the formulas of the fluid that goes in and creates the fractures within wells. There are also ways to reinforce fracking wells. For example, adding more steel onto these wells that would be able to reduce the risk of it rupturing and having all the fluids leaking out. And they can also reduce deep well injection. All of these will limit widespread damage caused by fracking. The government can also increase fines for safety violations at fracking sites. However, the only way to get rid of all of the negative aspects of fracking completely is to ban it overall, because as of right now, we do not have the technology to make this process completely safe. In New York, however, they have put a temporary statewide ban on fracking, which obviously completely removes the issues that come from fracking. However, they are working towards kind of a compromise. The New York Department of Environmental Conservation has proposed a 2,000-foot distance between fracking operations and public water supplies, and to have certain areas such as public parks and national forests and things like that to be completely off limits to fracking. The solution definitely seems to be somewhat of a good one because it protects public water supplies, but it may not be the best because, one, it doesn't protect groundwater and it doesn't protect against rupturing or earthquakes. In Virginia, as of 2014, there are 2,100 fracking wells, all of which are in southwest Virginia. Many wells actually throughout the rest of Virginia have been plugged and are no longer in use, including wells in the Marcellus shale bed and the Taylorsville Basin. The reason that old fracking sites have been plugged and are no longer in use in the Marcellus shale bed and the Taylorsville Basin is because the shale bed is relatively shallow and close to the surface, so the hydrocarbons, which is the natural gases that they're looking for, have already been released. Fracking is a cheap way to get natural gas up into storage and to use. However, there are many very, very, very negative side effects that are not worth it. It's not worth it to have increased production of natural gases if it also increases the number of birth defects and cancer cases.